Chapter 19, soon we're going to learn about the 10 commandments and what God would do up on the mountaintop at Mount Sinai. We're going to pick up in Exodus chapter 19. It says, on the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and you keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession." He says, if you do what I ask you to do, if you live the way that I call you to live, he says, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and he summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." We shall see if that takes place. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready for the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. For whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death." Okay, so this is kind of a big deal. Don't touch the mountain, God says. When I come down and my presence comes down and Moses comes to meet with me, don't try to interrupt it. Don't come touch it. Whoever does it will be put to death. Very clear. Verse 13. They're to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations. Consecrate yourselves. Remain from one another. Make sure that you're praying. Make sure that you're set apart. Make sure that you're prepared. God's about to do a work." Verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there were thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Verse 20. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy." The Lord replied, "Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them." So Moses went down and told the people what to do. Now, we're about to learn the 10 Commandments in chapter 20. God would give these to Moses. He would write them on the tablets of stone. It would travel about in the Ark of the Covenant. Many of you may have heard of the 10 Commandments before. You may even have memorized the 10 Commandments. This is where they are first found in Exodus chapter 20. And this is what God said. He said, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." No other gods before me. No other idols before me. There's nothing that's going to take the place of my worship. If you'll notice, the first commandment is the most important commandment. God says, the worship belongs to me. The attention, the focus, the adoration belongs to me. Remember what I did for you. I am the Lord your God. I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of slavery. You say, how do we take that for ourselves today? He is the Lord our God. He sent his son Jesus on the cross for us. He brought us out of sin, and he brought us out of death into the glorious light and into the glorious life of eternal life with him in heaven with Jesus Christ. You shall have no other gods before him. We shall have no other idols before him. This principle, this commandment, if I were to say this, is the most important of all commandments. You will have no other gods before him. Don't put anything before God. He lists them in a unique order, and I think it's important that we understand them. The first ones that are listed relate to your relationship with God, and then the later commandments relate to your relationship with man. There's a reason God ordered them the way that he did. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth below or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. I want you to understand this. He said, you shall not have an idol that you bow down or worship. And a lot of times we think as men and women, we think, oh, there's no way I would bow down and worship an idol. Be careful. Because I'll tell you this right now, my iPhone can become an idol. I may not bow down to it. I may not worship it or sing songs to it. But does it have my attention more than God has my attention? Does social media have my attention more than God has my attention? Do men and women and the desires to gain wealth or the desires to be famous, does it gain my attention more than God? There are things in our life that are idols that keep us from the true living God in a deep abiding relationship with him. We have to be aware. It's so interesting. I talked about this with one of my men's small groups that I was in. We were reading through and learning about what the children of Israel did. And sometimes when you read the story, you think there's no way I would ever be silly enough to bow down to a golden calf like they did. There's no way I would ever do the things they did. But at the same time, sometimes it just looks different. You know, I have to check myself. Does my mind bow down to the golden iPhone or the golden Apple on the back of the iPhone? And I'm not knocking on Apple. I have an iPhone. I don't like Androids. Sorry if you have an Android. But for me, I have to catch myself and say, is there something that gets my attention more than God? God says I'm a jealous God. And I want to share this. I want to take a moment and dive into this. There are some different words that are used in the Bible. There's the word jealousy, there's the word envy, and there's the word covet. We'll learn about it later in the 10 Commandments, the word covet. And a lot of times people misunderstand these words. For God would refer to himself as a jealous God. And a lot of times we hear the word jealous and we think that's a bad word. And I would share with you, not really, not necessarily. Jealous, when God says that he is jealous, it means that he's jealous for your attention or he's jealous for your worship. And he's jealous for something that is rightfully his. It rightfully belongs to him. And when he's robbed of it, he has a righteous jealousy that takes place because he's being robbed of something that belongs to him. Now, when you covet, that's when you want something that belongs to someone else. It's you will not covet your neighbor's house or you will not covet your neighbor's wife. When I covet something, that's when I want something that God has not said is for me. When I envy, that means I look at something that God has given to you and I'm envious of what you have. I'm envious of what you have, and it leads to covetousness. But when I'm jealous, that's when you have taken something that rightfully belongs to me, and I say, that's a wrong, that's an injustice, that belongs to me. So as such, God is a jealous God. God calls himself a jealous God and is unashamed of it. So when I read that, I know that it's not wrong for God to be jealous. There's something right about God being jealous. It's a righteous jealousy. But we need to be careful not to covet or to envy what others have. Does that make sense? Hope it does. Let's continue. Verse 7, number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Don't take God's name in vain. Don't take God's name in vain. Don't misuse his name. Don't abuse the holiness of his name. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither do you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, animals, or any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. God says, as one of the 10 Commandments, the 4th one, you need a healthy rhythm to life. You need a healthy rhythm to life. You need to rest on the 7th day. You need a day of rest. I need a day of rest. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land your Lord your God is giving to you. Interesting. He begins to move from the first 4 relate to your relationship with God. And then now he begins to move to your relationship with one another. And he says, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. This is the first commandment that comes with a promise we will learn. He says, if you honor your mother and father, God will give you a long life in the land that he's given to you. Verse 13, you shall not murder. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. Verse 15, you shall not steal. Verse 16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor or lie. Thou shalt not lie. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Covet, there's that word again. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. God tells us how to relate to him, and then God tells us how to relate to one another. Verse 18, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance, and they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Verse 22. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites, this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver, gods of gold. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice it on your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and your goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altars on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. These are the laws you are set before them. Interesting. God comes and reveals himself to the entire camp of Israel. And it says that he shows himself by fire. Fire is something that burns other things up. But whenever it burns up, what's remained is shown to be and proven to be true and pure. Similar to how when you heat up gold, all the imperfections and impurities will fall off. But what is true will remain. Our God is a consuming fire or a refining fire. And he comes to the people and he shares with them and he says, listen, I'm going to give you 10 commandments to live by. I'm going to give you 10 rules to live by. These rules aren't to restrict you. These rules are to preserve you. And if you live by these rules, you will be blessed. And I tell you, if you live by the rules that God has set for you, he's not restricting you. He's preserving you, and he will reward you. Be blessed today.